AskReddit by Reddit Universe. What are some creepy urban legends? There is a local lake that when I was growing up, I heard this story that a woman was drowned there by her fiancé. On certain nights she would come up out of the water, and if you happened to be parked near the lake, she would put her hand on your windshield. If she pulled her hand away and it left a handprint, it meant you were going to die too. That one about the guy who got lost hiking in the woods, so he wandered until he found a log cabin. He knocked the door but nobody answered. The door wasn't locked, so he went in. There was nothing in the cabin but a room with a bed and lots of paintings of monsters and beasts' faces in the walls. It was very late in the night already, so he fell asleep. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Then when it was morning he was getting his things ready to go out, and that's when he noticed the scary paintings disappeared, and in its place there were windows. Couple local legends in my hometown. We had witch trials a few years before Salem. 2 women were accused. One was hanged. Apparently her grave was very close to my friend's house, and when she would look out the back door some nights she'd see a woman with long black hair covering her face looking up at her bedroom. We also have an abandoned Revolutionary War fort where a young man got choked out by an unseen force. All his friends saw it happen. No one really goes up there at night anymore. The Whistler. Basically a son killed his father and the grandfather found out, whipped the boys back to a raw state and made him carry his dad's bones in a sack for all eternity. Scary thing is that when he is around you will hear a whistle. Thing is, the louder the whistle the farther away he is. The closer he is the whistle will sound more faint. It's said he does this to play with you and confuse you before mutilating you and adding your bones to his sack. Said to have killed hundreds of people. Heard a story once about a young girl whose boyfriend had asked her if she would like to go for a drink after her late shift. She agreed, but she had to go back to her house first to get changed. Arriving at her home she noticed her roommate was asleep. She crept into her room to borrow an item of clothing and without waking her managed to creep back out. The following morning she returned home to find her roommate had been violently murdered. On the mirror however in lipstick it read, "Bet you're glad you didn't turn the light on last night." And below it, in another, darker shade of lipstick it said, "You're." The one in my country that states there was once a foreigner that sang in a karaoke "My Way" by Frank Sinatra in the middle of the night but was shot in the head before he could finish it since he stole the mic from a killer that reserved the song, and some claim that it happened multiple times in a span of a decade in multiple locations. From that day on, patrons of any bar will refrain from choosing "My Way" in a karaoke in the middle of the night in fear that their lives will end before they could finish the song by a mysterious figure brandishing a pistol patrolling every bar that will end anyone that even dares to sing that song. In Pennsylvania there's the 7 Gates of Hell near Hellam Township. There was an insane asylum built in the forest away from the general population to keep all the patients away from people. It's believed that the asylum burnt down and many patients died during the fire or escaped into the surrounding forest. The name comes from the fact that a gate was built to keep the escaped patients from leaving the area. But when night falls you can follow the path past the first gate and will eventually pass through an additional 6 gates, and after passing through the 7th gate will end up in hell. This is a common story, but everyone adapts it to suit their local area. There's a road that gets foggy all the time going out my town, so that's where everyone says it happened. A girl was driving along the road late at night in the 80s. It was dark and foggy. Her car suddenly shut off, so she had to pull over and check out the engine. After she'd fixed it, she got back into the car and started to drive again. As she pulled out into the road, a large truck started flashing its lights at her. The girl kept looking in her rear view mirror, scared that the driver wanted her to stop so he could attack her. She didn't stop. She drove all the way home, with the truck following her the whole way, flashing the whole time. She didn't get out the car and honk the horn to get her father to wake up and come outside. The truck pulled into the driveway behind her as the dad came outside. "What's going on?" he said. The daughter got out her car, pointing at the truck. "This man's followed me all the way home from the marsh and he won't stop flashing his lights at me." The driver got out the car, yelling, "Get out of the way. I saw somebody get into the back of your car when you broke down. He's hiding there. I flashed you every time I saw him raise his axe." He ripped open the girl's car door and jumped on the man hiding there. The hands resist in painting, where the subjects of the paintings reportedly move around at night out of their frame. That one about the babysitter that brings the kids to bed. In the hallway is a statue of a clown that bugs her. When she goes to check on the kids a few hours later, she notices that the statue has a different stance. The babysitter starts to second guess herself, goes downstairs and the phone rings. It's the parents asking if everything is okay with the kids. Yep, everything is fine, except for that clown statue. It's creeping me out. The other side of the line goes, we don't have a clown statue. Grab the clown. Get out of the house. We don't have any kids. A woman met a nice man at a party and she went to his place afterwards to hook up. They really clicked, so they set up a date for another time. A day later she had a really bad rash around her mouth, so she went to the doctor. When the doctor saw it, he was shocked. Apparently that type of rash only come from being in contact with dead, decaying bodies. Turns out the man she met is a serial killer and likes to do it with dead women after he kills them, and she was his next victim. In my city, Jakarta, there is a popular urban legend of ride-hailing driver booked by a female ghost. There are several stories, but I remember this one clearly, as this one was told by the driver himself to me. He got an order from a female at 11 p.m. Usually most motorbike rider wouldn't accept order this late due to safety reasons, but this man was chasing his last point so he could get the bonus, and he took the order. At first he was rather suspicious, because the destination point was located at the front of TonezReC entry gate, a well-known cemetery complex. So he sent her a message, "Is the destination correct, miss?" And he got a short reply, "Yes." So he just drove and picked the girl up. There was nothing suspicious about the girl. Long black hair, red lipstick, wearing blue jeans and white shirt, just like any normal girls. So up they went to the girl's residence. The driver then said that she didn't talk at all during the trip, but he really didn't mind. He just drove through the usual route. The distance between the pickup points and the destination point was not far, only 5 kilometers away, about 2.5 miles, and he knew the road very well. He estimated they'll arrive in 5 minutes or less. When they were about to reach the destination, he asked the girl, "Where should I drop you off, miss?" But there was no response or answer from the girl. He looked at the mirror, and he almost fell off of his motorbike. The girl wasn't there anymore. But that was not the worst part. When he looked around, he suddenly realized that he was already inside of the cemetery complex. He drove frantically to the gate and went to a 24-hour coffee shop nearby. There were few customers there. The shop owner looked at him and asked, "What did you do in cemetery at 1 a.m.? He quickly checked his phone, and damn right, it was 1 a.m. He then opened the ride-hailing app to check the order from that girl, and as you've guessed it by now, there was no order from her at all, and he was still one order less from his bonus that day. I live in Florida and there's an old sugar mill from the 1600s near me. At some point the slaves on the plantation started a revolt with the help of the Seminole Indians and secured their freedom by killing many of the landowners. According to several people who were interviewed independently of each other, there is a ghostly Native American on horseback that still chases people off the property at the same time they attacked the colonists 400 years ago. On the island of Okinawa, Japan, there was a house in which a man killed himself and his family. It was said that he was persecuting the rest of the inhabitants. It is reported that after this event, various terrible things were going on in the house. A sudden turn on of light, or, for example, in the window you could see a woman who washes her hair in the sink. The scariest thing today is that this house was separated by a fence, and children 4-5 years old, who study not far in kindergarten, constantly throw toys into the fence. When asked why they do this, the guys said they want to play with the children on the other side. It is frightening to realize that almost all living children have seen the dead. This greatly frightened those who worked in the kindergarten. In my opinion, it's creepy. Here in Italy there is a legend in our high school that a guy killed himself by jumping over the window of his classroom. The fact here is that if you come to school early, I mean very early, you can see his ghost in the window of his classroom. Edit. Sorry for the bad English I self-taught. That legend where a couple is making out in a well-known spot in the woods. The girl is complaining about being afraid, while the guy is teasing her. Apparently, a man with a hook for a hand escaped from a local prison, and he was known for murdering young couples. Eventually, the girl convinced the guy to leave and take her home. When she gets out of the car, she starts to scream. A hook was stuck on the door handle. Gives me the shivers every time. We had a legend about Purple Archie. Before the days of political correctness and possibly a bit racist, as it was said he is that black that he is purple. He was meant to be a pedo who would grab lads, sodomize them and carve PA onto their buttocks with a knife. He was sort of a mythical figure. It wasn't sure if he was real. He was meant to prowl anywhere between Liverpool, Manchester and the school summer camp in North Wales, where he was meant to haunt the boys' ablutions, causing men to wet the bed rather than get up in the night and walk over there on your own. It was all rumor and hearsay. A pirate ghost Pegleg was also meant to inhabit these ablutions and was only marginally less believable than Purple Archie. About 15-20 years ago, with the internet becoming more widespread, it transpired that he actually exists, and the truth is maybe even more bizarre than the original tales. Stranger Things is based on legends from my hometown. It's actually on the east end of Long Island, the Demogorgon. We called that the Montauk Beast, the Montauk Monster, or just the Beast. We used to break into the old Air Force base, and there were always rumors that it was never actually shut down and everything was just moved underground. It was called the Montauk Project, and it's a pretty well-known one. But most people don't know about the more local parts like the Beast taking kids, or why there's higher rates of twins and triplets out there and stuff like that. The one where the girl wakes up after a stormy night alone to find her family and her dog murdered, with humans lick 2 painted on the wall in blood, after she'd spent the stormy night being comforted by what she thought was her dog licking her hand from beneath her bed. I'm also a big fan of the one where a man goes to a motel. When he gets there, he's told explicitly to avoid one room in particular, as it was locked and no one was allowed inside of it. Eventually he becomes too curious about the room to obey. He tries the door but it is locked, and so he looks into the keyhole instead. He sees an extremely pale woman in an otherwise normal hotel room, her back to the door and his keyhole. He almost knocks, but doesn't. The next morning, he peeks into the room again on his way to the front desk. This time, he sees nothing but the color red, assuming that his earlier nosiness had been discovered, and something hung over the keyhole to block his view. He continues on his way to the desk. Still curious, he asks the lady at the front desk about the room, and on her prodding, admits he peeked into the room. The woman at the desk sighs and informs him that the room had been locked off due to a man murdering his wife there. They had both been pale as milk, with blood red eyes. That have you seen this man? Dream thing. I don't like how the picture looks right at you, it's unnerving. One of my favorite legends from my home province is the tale of Slashfoot, except this one is heavily sprinkled with the truth, just exaggerated for us kids. There was a popular summer camp I used to go to, that used to be a normal family ranch before it was a camp. In the 60s the family hired a man, Morris, to be their ranch hand, and one day he ended up cutting his foot lengthwise with an axe while chopping wood. Since it was the 60s and he was a hippie type, he refused to see a doctor and insisted on treating it with homemade poultices and shit. That's how he got his name. The family wanted to surprise him and bring his wife out for a visit one weekend, but she ended up dying in a crash on the way. He blamed them for her death, and went legitimately insane from a combination of rage, drugs, and the infection in his foot. He made it his life's mission to get revenge on the family by tormenting them, leaving dead animals hung up by their door, killing their farm cats, all that fun stuff. They never arrested him because of how guilty they felt for everything. They actually did feel at fault for his descent into madness. He was still alive for the first 10ish years of the camp being operational, and since the camp was run by the same family, he took it upon himself to up the ante and torment the kids that came to the camp instead. I've heard dozens of terrifying Slashfoot stories from counselors that used to attend the camp as kids, and had run-ins with Morris. Too many to post here though. In Mesa, Arizona, there used to be a monkey farm that has since been abandoned. There's not a lot to do here for people under 21, so after chilling at a coffee shop, we would sometimes go spelunking through abandoned buildings. One night we decided to go and visit the monkey farm. There were a lot of rumors going around about the origins of the facility and the types of experiments occurring in the facility, from them just testing basic things like medication all the way up to mutant monkey hybrids. Some people said that the facility was haunted, because you could hear things banging from outside of the facility. Some people claimed they heard monkeys screeching. Throughout everyone in my age group, people started saying that the screeching was a hybrid that had been left behind, the facility being abandoned overnight because once it broke loose, everyone fled and never looked back. Other rumors was that it was a monkey death camp, that the staff had left the monkeys behind, which thrived on cannibalism, a literal hell on earth for primates. Years later, footage started popping up showing that there were in fact monkeys still in the facility. The local branch of Fox News dug into it and found out that the facility had been, under the radar, re-established by the University of Washington and has been in use for several years now to breed monkeys for experiments. The part that makes the urban legend and rumors much more interesting is knowing that while we were exploring, those were real monkey screams and not just figments of our imaginations. The Aboriginal people of Australia talk about the hairy men, which is some kind of ape-like beast. Another name is the yowie. Basically these things were blood-sucking creatures that would eat you, and the Aboriginal people were pretty afraid of them. Apparently they would stalk you and follow you through the bush, and they move fast. The weird thing is though there are lots of different tribes in Australia with different languages, but all of the tribes' name for these creatures translates to hairy men. Also drop bears, gotta watch out for drop bears when you're in the bush. They fall on you from the trees and rip your throat out with their sharp little teeth. The killer clowns in their van kidnapping/slashing kids were a thing when I was growing up. Resurfaces now and again with a new twist every so often. Also, guys handing out perfume cards which are chloroform. You collapse, they then rape rob you. Or the well-dressed businessman offering to help change your tire after it's punctured. He may have let the air out. He puts his briefcase in your car while he waves to reverse out. He asks for a lift to his car at the other side of the car park as a thanks. But you notice the briefcase open and there's basically Dennis from Always Sunny's serial killer kit in it. You then speed away and report to the cops. Dolls in car seats left at the side of a motorway so a driver stops. Robbed car, stolen, etc. This also has another version where eggs are thrown at the windscreen after the car seat, forcing you to stop. You then get robbed, car stolen. First one is nonsense, but there's some belief in the other three. Not really an urban legend, but on the way back from my grandmother's house we often see a man, early 60s, walking down the road alone in the dark. It's in a rural area so the road is surrounded by forest, and it creeps us out every time. It's kind of become an urban legend among our immediate family. If creepypastas count, it's probably Smile JPG or Smilodog. Holy duck, I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight. I remembered that there was this story about a secret Japanese experiment near the end of World War II where an officer voluntarily goes into complete isolation to see the effects of isolation on the mind. He can cancel the experiment at any time by pressing a button. After about a month or so, he notices the food stops coming. After a while he decides that he can deal with isolation, but not starvation, so he presses the cancel button. Nothing happens. Now realizing that he's probably trapped in his room, he starts reciting the date and place to himself to keep his sanity. He's in an underground base in Hiroshima. The date is the 20th of August, 1945. I read a similar story about a German science program that took 5 soldiers and placed them in a bunker under Berlin with a year's worth of supplies. They were testing the ability of men to live in small quarters in darkness and poor ventilation for long periods of time, in an effort to improve the range of the submarines. The lead scientist on the program defected to the US at the end of the war and goes on to work for NASA, developing methods for men to live in space capsules for extended periods of time. He was part of the team that designed the Apollo module so the US could land on the moon. After he died in the 1980s, his papers were left in his estate and someone thought about collecting them and donating them to NASA. Thousands of pages of notes and diaries were shipped to NASA HQ in Washington, D.C. where they sat until 2002. A librarian at the NASA library uncovered the boxes of these notes and noticed that a good bit of them were in German, so she made copies and sent them to her colleague who spoke German to translate. A few months later, she gets a call from the translator who asked her what type of horror story was working on. Confused, she asked what he meant. The translator explained that he's just read through a journal that followed the day-to-day life of a World War II-era soldier who was tasked with being a test subject in a program designed to study how a small team of humans reacted to prolonged isolation. He went on to say that the journal spanned for 2 years. with the final entry simply stating "I die a forgotten man," with a note in another handwriting stating a date 3 years later marking the date the bunker was reopened and that the project had failed because British bombing has buried the bunker site, and they assumed the subjects were dead. He then asked the librarian where she got the idea for a story about 5 men trapped underground for a year, only to discover their project had been forgotten and their bunker was not reopened until just before the end of the war 5 years later. The journal was gruesome, with the author killing the 4 other members of his team to stretch out his food and water supply. Most of the entries were just long rambling rants about nothing, a lunatic's rambling. The leader of the project fled to America after the Germans reopened the bunker and just tried to pretend he didn't leave 5 men in a hole underground to their fate. I grew up in the town where the movie The Conjuring took place. I passed the house every day going to work and on my way home. Every time I pass the house I keep looking in my rearview mirror thinking that the witch Bathsheba would appear in my back seat. I even visited her grave a couple of times after the movie came out. My girlfriend has also kissed Bathsheba's grave one drunken night. The Smiling Man. Look it up at YouTube. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to Reddit Universe.